Hello, everyone. Having a little Zoom fatigue. I'll be visible shortly. Just need a break.
We're still getting some folks in from the waiting room, so just hang tight. We're gonna get everybody connected here, and then we will get going. Okay. Looks like the waiting room slowed down. Brian will keep an eye on that, but Steve, do you want to open up the meeting here and kick us off?
Certainly. First of all, on behalf of the Forward Together groups, our client group, the leadership group, I want to thank you all for tonight. It's our third meeting of the advisory committee, and we have a very exciting program for you today. I do want to introduce, we have two new members who are students to the advisory committee. It's Nolan Jones. And Nolan, can you give us a wave, or if I can see you? Thank you, Nolan. I appreciate it. And then we have also Michael Duncan. Michael, if you can give us a wave. And I can't see everybody, so you might be waving right.
There he is.
Great. Thank you very much. I do want to tell you we have some observers tonight who are part of the client group, or representatives of the city, the library, and the schools. That includes Amy Switzer, who's the executive director of the library. We have Mayor David Weiss from the city, and then we also have Dr. David Glasner. So I thank them all for being here tonight, and they'll be observing through the evening. As you know, this is your meeting, and our client group has really, our consultant group, excuse me, has really put together a great program for you. It's going to be quite unusual. We're going to have some breakouts, and I'll let them explain that. But I do want to thank three individuals from the consultant group. First, Dr. Tamika Taylor, who's been has helped us along through this process. Sarah Bongiorno from Planning Next. By the way, Dr. Taylor is part of Compass Consulting. And then also Chris Dewey, who is from VAA Architects. They put together tonight's program, and we're very excited to do this. And I think you're going to find the topics very interesting. We're going to try to expand what we need in Shaker and get your input on that. So I'm going to pass it on to Sarah and Chris, and if you can get us started. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Steve. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We've got presentation for the first part of our meeting, and then we have some breakout sessions planned later. So I'm on one screen tonight, and I'm trying to get there. Can everybody see that PowerPoint? Okay. So as Steve mentioned, this is our third meeting with the group, and we're excited to have you all here. Our agenda tonight is that we are going to share some results from our workshops, the Building the Vision workshops, and engagement that we've been doing for the last month. Chris is also going to provide a little update on the next steps, how we're using all that input, and the assessments and other technical work that his group's working on to shape up some scenarios. And we're going to spend most of the time in small group discussions around three kind of questions focused more on the community, facilities, recreation, things like that. And then we'll want to bring everybody back together at the end, do some reporting out, and we'll talk about next steps. So that's our plan for the meeting here tonight. I do want to say that we've all been very busy, including you all, helping us over the past month with the workshop that we've conducted. So we just an engagement overview to remind you, we had an online survey open October 6th through the 31st. We had 2 virtual workshops on October 7th, one at noon and one at 6 p.m. We had in-person workshops at the middle school, the community building in Shelton Park. And thank you to all of you who helped out in various ways. I know many of you attended the in-person workshops and helped us man the stations and interact with folks and generally, represented the process. I know that a lot of you helped spread the word. We got some numbers to share with you, but we really, we all worked together to do our best, put our best foot forward in this first round and got a lot of people engaged. And then I know some of you, went that extra step to conduct a meeting in a box. We had some with a PTO and the SAMS group. I really appreciate the extra effort. You will see that, even though we did reach a lot of people, we're missing some critical demographics and voices in this community. And several of you helped us fill that gap. So we still have some work to do. We're going to talk more about that, but we did get some good input that Chris and his team have been reviewing and are, using as they start to shape up these options. So in total, we heard from, 719 people as part of this first round of engagement. 617 of those came through the online survey. So those of you who shared the link and pushed it out to folks, and we really appreciate that because a lot of people felt comfortable and were able to engage through the online engagement tool. Then we had, the virtual workshops attendees, in-person workshop, and the meeting in a box attendees. The total number of comments received was over 7,000, which is really impressive. And Chris's team has been busy looking through all those comments and looking for themes, and we're going to share a little bit about that tonight. So again, we're really appreciative of your help in helping to get the word out to folks. So this is a breakdown of some demographics. So you can see here the age. We've got, under 18 in the census for the community, we got 26%. We only had 9% participate in this first round, but we knew that getting the young folks' voice is really important, but also hard. So Tamika has been working with those at the school with Marla and others to put together another, student group to help think about and strategize ways to get that youth voice in. And so we're really going to be, working with that group going forward to make sure that's folded in because, we didn't get as many as we wanted to in this first round. Otherwise, I think we were light on the younger folks, but we hit the other age demographics fairly closely. So, we feel pretty good about that, but we really still need to focus on getting the younger voice in. I think the most notable thing here is that, again, we're comparing this to the Shaker Heights School District here, the demographics. And so, we've got the African-American at 47%, those who participate in the process only at 20%. So we really want, we really were trying to close that gap, and we did close the gap utilizing some of that meeting in a box approach. And some of you who helped with that, I really, really appreciate that. But we've got work to do here. We really need to continue to make progress on that. We're going to talk about that a little bit at the end. And then the neighborhoods here represented, the folks who participated, we asked them what neighborhood they're from. So you can see that we're really, we're low on Ludlow, Moreland, Sussex, and Malvern are kind of on the lower end, and otherwise Onaway and Lomond had the most participation, but we really need to try to get direct neighborhood outreach into these groups moving forward. So part of the reason, there's 2 reasons why we asked for this information. One is we do want to make sure that who we're hearing from is representative of the larger community, but also we want to learn where we need to put more effort going forward, right? So we're going to do another round. This is iterative. We're going to do another round of engagement. And so we know we're going to have to work hard to get folks Moreland, Ludlow, Malvern. And so it helps us to get smarter each time we do it so that we can go out and tailor our approaches. So, so I think this is good, a good start, but we got work to do. We really need to close the gap on some of these demographics. So we're going to work hard on that moving forward. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. So just to remind you, we did have 6 stations where we were asking folks to engage with us. And We started out with a guiding principle station. We had a station about where facilities were located currently, about how the facilities can be improved. And we had specific questions about, renovation or build new. We had a station about equitable access to facilities and how our facilities can be more equitable. We had two stations 5 and 6, that were really more focused on the schools themselves and this 21st century learning idea, and trying to introduce some concepts there and get some input. And then about how the schools are organized, or the grade banding, what grades are together in a building. And we got some input, helpful input on that as well. So that was sort of just a quick review. And now Chris and I are going to tag team going through and sharing with you all what we heard at each of these stations, both from a qualitative and quantitative standpoint. Some of the questions we asked, you can add them up, and 94% of people said this or yes or no. Others we were looking for through comments that people put on the Post-it notes up on the boards. And Chris and his team went through and reviewed all those comments and pulled out some common themes of things that they were hearing, or ideas that were coalescing together. And we're going to share that with you. So we'll go through each station. We'll kind of pause at the end to see if you have any questions, comments, any reactions before we move on to the other stations. Before I get into this, does anybody have any questions or comments or anything they'd like to share before we get into the station input?
May I ask a question real quick?
Yeah, sure.
The breakdown that you just had, could you provide that age breakdown and then down another level and put the neighborhoods or race with it to, I would be interested to see if there's different types of engagement based on age and the different demographics. For instance, say if your African-American demographic was a younger age, but you're advertising these activities and these places to go from.
Yeah.
In a different age bracket, it might. I was just interested in that. So
Yeah.
That's good. I enjoyed seeing that information.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. We might learn something by looking at that correlation. So yeah, we can try to pull something together and send that out.
This is Jackie. I said before, and I did this in Georgia, you have to, in the Moreland area, you got 2 churches. You have to involve the churches in our community. You cannot separate and get the feedback that you want from African Americans. I worked in the churches in Georgia, and as I look at this percentage, and I'll say it again, you can't separate it. When I was in Shaker, because I've been in Shaker since 1965, I came in through integration. I graduated in 71. It was a part of the community. Eastview was a part of it. There's another church up there, over there off of Lee Road. You cannot separate it. You have to unite it to get the feedback from all of them.
Yeah, that'd be great. Do you have personal contacts of those churches? Because if you could connect us with folks, I mean, as we're gearing up for the second round, I'd love to be able to, connect in with folks, who have connections there.
I go down there, and I met the pastor down there, and I know some of the members that go there.
Yeah.
Because I've been down there myself. Some of them knew my pastor in Georgia. So yes, I'll be willing to try to get the information. I think if we could just utilize Eastview in the Moreland community to have a meeting and stuff like that, because they're older people that do go down there.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jackie. We'll definitely do that. Thank you. Any other comments or reactions or ideas? Those are great ideas. Okay. So station 1 was about the guiding principles. And we had a set of, I think it was maybe 10 or 12. I can't remember exactly, Chris, that were talking about, how we were going to go about this work. And 94% of people agreed with the guiding principles. Those resonated with them. But there were some comments, some additional themes here. And Chris, I don't know if you want to hit on these a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. So the common themes that we saw for this station, by overwhelming number, was sustainability, to include some aspect of sustainability, which I thought was very good and really should have been included initially, but we didn't have it included. So it's great that we got that. And that could be a lot of different things. That could be a reuse of existing school buildings, which is very sustainable, renovation versus building new. or it could mean things like solar power. So we'll definitely add that as one of the guiding principles moving forward. We also heard about modern enhanced recreation facilities, value and enhanced recreation options in the community. And as you notice, these are all in quotes. So these are specific comments we received that we thought were indicative of the comments that we heard as the overall common themes. So we wanted to make sure that those specific comments were illustrated here. We also have accessibility for all is essential to allow all Shaker residents to enjoy all community assets. And then we heard diversity, equity, inclusion needs to be better defined to elaborate on values and the purpose of the terms. And we've taken that to heart and have talked about that as part of the client group and leadership group about what that means beyond that sort of general guiding principle. So with that, we'd love to hear any thoughts or feedback any of the advisory committee members have on those common themes.
Chris, do you have these in order of ranking or number of responses? Is that what this represents?
So only only for sustainability. That is the first and the overwhelming one that we heard the most of. The others are not ranked in any specific order, but are the most common themes that we picked up from all the respondents in the comments.
And was the term sustainability used in inference to coming up with processes and practices that can continue, or more specific to, how we use materials and things of that nature?
In most cases, it wasn't really specified. It was just like this sustainability or comments that the community should look at sustainable efforts, but it wasn't overly well clarified to directly answer your question.
Thank you.
Any other comments before we move on? Thoughts? But Sarah, I guess I would add that, having the guiding principles, and we'll get into this a little bit further in the presentation, that allows us, when we are creating scenarios or options for the master plan, these are essentially a blueprint or a back check for us to say, if we institute this change or this element of the master plan, how does that work relative to these guiding principles? So knowing that 94% of the community agreed with those principles is great. And we'll, of course, add these additional common themes and then use those as a back check as we move forward with the scenarios.
Yep. That's great.
Was there any specification as to why people did not agree with the guiding principles, or which guiding principle they did not agree with in specific?
No, so we only asked them sort of yes or no questions. And there were, interestingly enough, there were a few on the in-person responses that sort of put a dot sort of in the middle, where they might have agreed with the majority. This is our interpretation. They might have agreed with some or all of them, but not every single one of them. But no, for the most part, they didn't sort of give us a lot of information on what they disagreed with. It was either sort of a yes or no.
Thank you.
And then if there were any additional items, that's usually the comments that we got as part of the station.
And Chris, I want to piggyback on, there was a gentleman that asked a similar question earlier. It would be good to see those themes that rose up to the top, the percentages of the responses that included those.
Yeah, so we are not done with this. So with the way the process is sort of flowing, Planning Next, as well as our office, are going to take this and create an actual report on all the first round engagement information. These were sort of us reviewing it, starting to create some of the scenarios. We wanted to just highlight those main themes. But yes, we can definitely put in relative to sustainability, how many comments we got relative to that. We can definitely do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Chris, one other question, just on the reference to, on the second bullet, value and enhance recreational options in the community. I can't remember if that was an open-ended one. Did people specify the types of recreational options, or just generally?
Just generally. So these are their exact comments. If there was anything else, we would have included that. That's just
Okay.
Yeah. But
Thanks.
if you're asking in more general terms beyond this one initial comment, there wasn't a lot of specificity to that specific item.
Okay, just curious. Thanks.
Okay. All right, the second station was about where the facilities are located and asked folks to think, across the city, thinking citywide, how important the current facility locations were and which locations were most important and why. And so these are some of the comments. And Chris, if you want to.
Yeah, so we were a little surprised, or maybe not so surprised, that a lot of people said the current locations are good. So, we read that as, and there's a good distribution of whether that be elementary schools, different facilities in the city, that at first pass, they felt that those were, good locations. We also heard that they're very important to have facilities spread throughout the city. Libraries are very important, which is an interesting comment, sort of secondary to the current locations are good, about having facilities spread throughout the city. And then the schools and libraries are most important because they are gathering places for the people coming together. Those were sort of the main three themes that we picked up for this station. And again, going back, Vicki, your comment, we will, in a similar fashion on all these stations, we'll try to quantify exactly how many people had very similar comments to each one of these items so that we can report that ideally maybe at the next AC meeting, or if not on number 4, then on number 5, depending on the timing. So any thoughts or questions on this relative to where the facilities are located?
Yeah, this is Melissa. I think it would be important to know which facilities that they are saying are good. I mean, are these people that frequent these facilities or they never have? So they don't have necessarily a negative about it. So it seems good, even though they don't actually use them.
Sure.
Yeah, Melissa, are you talking about the actual facility itself versus the location?
Yeah, like if
Okay.
they're saying they look good, but they actually never have really been there. So, they don't really have a thought one way or the other, positive or negative, but they just went with it.
Oh, I lost you there for a second, Melissa.
Yeah,
I hear
lost
what she's saying. I think that what Melissa's saying is this is good is another way of saying it. I'm really neutral on the subject.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yep.
they are
Yep.
good. Giving them a 10, like which ones?
Yeah. Okay. I
No,
think.
but Brian, I do think that's a good comment that, we have to interpret these a little bit because we're getting these comments based on the question that we asked. So we have to sort of look through the lens, through their potential lens. But I think you're right that it could be that they're somewhat neutral about where the locations currently reside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that, I was just going to say, I know that from the in-person meetings, and I feel like the virtual workshops a little bit too, but I know definitely the in-person meetings that people tended to put a lot more comments. The next question is about thinking about your neighborhood. And I know that it was a lot easier for people. They had more comments about thinking about what they wanted to see in their neighborhood. There weren't as many Post-it notes and not as much people, I think, when they were thinking citywide. So that may have been a little bit harder maybe for them, to the point that Melissa was saying, like they don't know all the facilities. And so they're like, yeah, that seems fine. Maybe they're more neutral on the subject. So just a little bit of, again, I don't know on the online engagement necessarily, but I just know that the in-person and the virtual people definitely gave us more comments on that, on the next question, that allowed them to sort of zero in on their neighborhood.
So this is Stephanie. So I'm kind of, and you may get to it in the next slide. It's like remembering what all of these questions were, but in your slide about who participated, I made a note to myself that your high percentage neighborhoods are all the neighborhoods that have K-4 elementary schools, and the rest of the neighborhoods were lower. So I wonder if this how these results are sort of impacted like that. Like the current locations are good because our neighborhood has facilities, right? Like it is hard to separate the citywide from your specific neighborhood. So I guess I'm just sort of like thinking about how those, who participated and how that impacts what these answers are.
Yeah.
Right.
No. Yep, that's very true. That's a good comment. And also why we really need to work hard the next round to try to make sure we've got that even representation. Because like you said, you know, and that's also why I think these are great comments and great questions, because we do need to interpret these a little bit. And I think having this commentary with this is exactly why we wanted to have this conversation with you all tonight, so that you could provide some of this interpretation for us and some things to think about. So I appreciate that. Okay. I'm going to move on to the next one. This one was about the neighborhood, thinking about where you live in the neighborhood, what types of facilities or spaces do you want to see? And again, we were, you know, broad in this: schools, libraries, city facilities. So Chris, you want to share these themes?
Yep. So we heard a lot about additional green space, playgrounds were very important, library, school, again, parks, libraries, a full recreation center with gym facilities. We did hear quite a few times comments about recreation centers and community centers with indoor pool, workout center, again, green spaces. And I think probably one of the bigger responses is a dog park. That is probably in order of preference. We heard that as a resounding comment quite a bit of the time for incorporation of one or multiple dog parks in the city. We'd love to hear any AC members' comments of, we've heard some people love the idea of dog parks until they get them, and then all the dogs start barking, and then they realize that there's a price to be paid with the dog parks. But I think we can all agree that green space and recreation centers, community centers, spaces for us to interact as a community are pretty valuable and would be nice to have as part of the master plan. But any comments from the advisory committee? Thoughts?
Oh, sorry.
Yep. I'm sorry, I didn't see who just was. Did someone have a comment?
That was me. I thought someone else was talking. So I understand the want for a dog park. However, I think while I've heard this like frequently, at the same time, it makes me wonder how much of a priority it is right now in the district. Whereas like when I see green space and playgrounds and libraries and schools and recreation centers, I think of places for kids to go after school to stay out of trouble or to keep themselves busy or to enhance their learning or to socialize in a safe place. And so I feel like those facilities and things should be prioritized more than a dog park, just because, I mean, this is just my personal opinion, but just because, you know, we still have students at the high school who are struggling so badly with their mental health that we've had, you know, like suicide threats. Like, so we need to create facilities for these students to feel safe and to feel like they can go somewhere and be safe and spend their time wisely. And it's just, it makes me wonder if we are prioritizing this dog park over our students and the well-being of them.
Yeah, that's a good comment. I mean, I think our takeaway from this is we just asked, you know, thinking about what are the types of facilities, what do you really want? And you bring up a very good point there. In the hierarchy of things, the dog park does not, you know, rise to the top relative to some other items. But just in the general terms of Station 2 and in this lens of what we've asked people, that's sort of what we got back as a response. We actually had a very good meeting with the client group and leadership group earlier this week, where we talked about the importance of educational equity being the priority, and then how does recreation and other elements sort of fall in line with that, and where does it happen sort of on the spectrum or the priority list. So we're still working through that. Obviously, because necessarily the dog park was the the number one priority we heard doesn't mean that it's going to be the number one priority as part of the master plan. And I can pretty much guarantee you it will not be the number one priority of the master plan, but could be a component of it. So hopefully that, Danielle, hopefully that addresses your comment to some degree.
Quick, I think a quick win with the community center, with indoor pool and workout center. We have that all over the city. Well, Thornton's not indoor, but at the schools, there would be an opportunity to utilize the school's indoor pool, workout center for the community more so than it is now. I think would be a quick win in that area for just kind of for everybody.
Yep. That's a good comment. That's a good suggestion for a synergy between the city and the schools. Yep. And as part of the presentation, a little bit further, we're going to talk about what current recreation facilities are available throughout the city, and what we might want to see in addition, or some of those synergies would be great to talk about in more depth. Thank you for that comment.
And I see Nicole has her hand raised.
Yeah, I was just gonna.
Oh, yeah, and this is kind of a follow-up to Danielle's question, but I'm guessing the next phases of input, like I would hope there'd be priorities, like, here are some scenarios, here are needs we need to address. And I guess, yeah, because I know there's, like you said, there's so many things you can throw out. This would be nice, that would be nice. When you really think of what's needed most, and I think if you make everyone who's answering these input questions, everyone aware of, okay, here's what residents say they need, and here's, possible plans to address those. I would just hope there's priorities in there because, the people proposing the dog park might not realize that there are a lot of high school students that need somewhere to go after school.
Yes. Yeah. That's a good comment. Yep. We agree with that 100%, that we will need to establish priorities. And if there's multiple scenarios that are developed and shared with the advisory committee and the public and the community, then yeah, absolutely, those priorities will need to be established. Or we get feedback from the community on what they think those priorities need to be.
Okay.
I think I saw a couple other hands, but I can't see the full list of folks. So if you got your hand raised, if you have a comment, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to follow up with Danielle. Just from my own personal experience as a high school student many years ago, a place for the youth to gather in a safe place is a very high priority. And although we see a community center with a workout center and a recreation center with gym facilities and the like, specifically, I went to the boys club, and then there was an adjacent girls club back 50 years ago. And that was a place that kept me out of trouble personally. So I wanted to put that high on the list, and I don't see it here.
I'd like to add to Frank's comment. I just recently learned of Boys and Girls Clubs now collaborating with schools, and the fact that they are actually moving into school buildings. One school I just heard about was Bolton Elementary. I don't know where that is here in Cleveland, but they have an in-house Boys and Girls Club. I just thought that was some creative thinking there.
You think that's a Cleveland Metropolitan School District building, or it's just somewhere in the Cleveland vicinity?
I am not sure, but I do get the impression it's with CMSD.
Okay, we'll look into that. Thank you.
It's a Cleveland school in the central neighborhood, and they actually have several schools that have girls and boys clubs within the Cleveland schools.
Okay, thank you. That's a great comment. Appreciate that.
All right. Anybody else before I move on? I want to get through this so we can make sure we have enough time for our discussion questions as well. But anybody else, any other comments on Station 2? Okay. The last part of Station 2 was about this question about thinking generally about facilities and asking folks about a sort of decentralized approach where you've got facilities, located in each neighborhood versus a centralized facility, maybe one larger facility that draws community together. And we were purposely vague on this and just said, thinking broadly. As you can see, it kind of splits the splits down the middle there. Because, and I know that in the in-person workshops, we were having people put dots on, you know, a centralized area of the board and a decentral, and people were putting it right where we had the line dividing them. They were putting their dot there. So we interpret this to mean, which is rightfully so, that it's not one or the other, that it's really, you know, depends on what it is. And there's probably sort of a hybrid approach here. But we wanted to ask the question because I think, you know, again, you don't know until you ask. So I think we learned something here that I think it depends. And I think there were probably, you know, a few comments where people put that to the effect on the Post-it, like, you know, it sort of depends. I can't really just make this large assumption about I want all centralized or all decentralized. So, and then Chris, I don't have anything more to add to this, but I think that, you know, we learned that it's not sort of one or the other, but it is sort of a hybrid approach, most likely.
Yes, agreed.
And I do think keeping Stephanie's earlier comment in mind around, you know, high resource areas is important when we look at this and consider this one as well.
Yeah. Yep. Thanks, Vicki. Any other questions or comments? Okay. So in station 3, we were asking about improvements to certain facilities, and we had a listing and we had a place for people to put their dot or indicate whether they thought the Shaker High School should be renovate or build new, and so on down the list. So we've highlighted here, you know, there's a pretty strong, opinion of the folks that participated that the high school should be renovated. The middle school, you know, more people thought it should build that one new. The Shaker Elementary School is very strong support for renovating existing. The community building also renovate existing. Thornton Park was interesting. I highlighted that in blue because it was the one that was more split, you know, even, and that people felt not, you know, it was more even in that people thought, you know, could renovate exist or build new. And then the Bertram Woods branch, you know, 77% of folks thought that renovate that existing building was the way to go there. So again, you know, some of the things that we heard, and we know it's hard. We tried to give some background information about the age of the buildings, and, you know, folks are more familiar with certain facilities than others. But I know that the in-person workshops, you know, people were like, well, there's a lot of factors, you know, like if it's more expensive to do one or the other, cost factors and different things. And obviously a building that you already have built is a more sustainable approach in a lot of ways. There's embodied energy in that building that, you know, you're capturing if you're renovating existing. So there's a lot of factors here. And so we understand that people we're kind of asking them their gut reaction based on maybe the historic nature of the architecture or some other factor. We know Chris and his team are doing assessments on these buildings, and so that's going to factor in as well. But anyway, I'll pause here and see if, and Chris, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to this, but if anybody has any reactions to this or comments, I'd love to hear them now.
I think the only thing I would add is that we know, and we heard from some of the public sessions that people didn't feel like they had all the information. So, you know, the cost to renovate a new high school versus building a new high school. We are working on that. We're working with the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission to get pricing on that. Also with Gilbane Construction, they're part of our team to understand what the cost for building new is. So as we are developing the scenarios and as we go through the second and third engagement rounds, we will have that information to share so that people are a little bit more informed on whether we renovate or build new.
Yeah.
Are there any thoughts or questions on this one?
I have a comment.
Yep. Hey, Crystal.
My comment first is about middle school. When people see a old building in terrible condition or close to it, first thing they want to do is demolish it. Renovation will never come to their mind. Middle school hasn't been taken care of as well as the high school. That's why I think you see more percentage of it, you know, 83% want renovation for the high school and demolition for the middle school. I'm still calling it Woodbury. So if the middle school was renovated as well as the high school, I think people will like to keep it as opposed to having it demolished. Both of them are historic buildings, and they are footprints here in Shaker Heights. And if they go away, no part of Shaker Heights will go away. I mean, there's a lot of things that make Shaker Heights, and if we start chipping away at them,
we won't be known as a very good planned community anymore. I'm done.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I thought I saw, did he have his hand up?
Yeah, thanks. It's Brian Galuli. I did kind of and Melissa Joyner helped me, did kind of a out of the box meeting by spending time when the hockey parents were at the rink and also during open ice on one of the rink times, just walking up to parents. So I just dove right into this one, asking about Thornton Park. And so the fact that you have blue and blue, I just wanted to comment on that. I think I still owe Tamika some of these people's comments, but one of the major factors for people when they think about the use of the ice is the number of rinks and the size of the rink. Our rink is small compared to other ice rinks that Shaker residents use all around the city and region and, multi-state area. We have a small rink. In addition, we have one, and the locker facilities are not accommodating for this sport as much as they may have used to been. There's more girls that play hockey, and so you need more changing spaces, and because there's girls and boys on the same team. And so that just requires suddenly two locker rooms per team. And then ice time is so precious, it just seems like hockey will assume the whole day somewhere. It'll be all practices or all games or something, and having two rinks provides more flexibility. And so I can tell you that the comments are all about two rinks, two ice sheets, they call them, and more locker rooms and more creature comforts for parents who sit there for 2 hours on end in shifts of every single 2 hours for a 12-hour day in the rink. So that's like real, but I think that also lends itself to, do we build new? Is there room at Thornton? Do we put it somewhere else? Like, where can we go? And I know my own opinion, but I heard other people's opinion was there's lots of space at the middle school to put 2 sheets of ice, but it's a middle school. So what do you do with that? So I just wanted to put my comments here, and I promised Tamika I'll write them up too.
Great. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
I do want to just address quickly that, because we heard this come up, as a question from the public when we were at the in-person workshops about, how come the main library isn't on this list? And, it is undergoing a significant renovation and getting close now, which is super exciting. And so it's not on this list for, facility improvements, because it is not going to need physical improvements. It's just undergoing that now, but it definitely is on the table for joint programming opportunities. And so it's not that we're leaving the Wayne Library out of the conversation by any means, but it's a different conversation. And actually one of our small group discussion questions later, when we break out into breakout groups, is just about that, joint programming opportunities. So if you've got thoughts about the library, the main library, I think that there's some time to share those there, but I know that did come up in the public. So I would just want to remind everybody about why it's, not on this list in case you were wondering. So any other comments or reactions, anything surprising in these numbers? Look, it looks like a couple other hands are raised there.
Yeah, this is Melissa. So I'm really surprised about the renovate the existing Shaker High School. Having gone to the high school back in the 80s, I can remember how crowded the hallways were and how crowded the staircases were. And the high school is on an oval. So when I think about renovating, like, are you going to go up? Because you can't go out. And it just makes me wonder. And I can appreciate what the lady was saying about keeping the original, historic value of it. Interesting to see how they really could just make it bigger so that you don't feel like you're on top of, one another. And then my daughter went to the high school. And when I would go up there for conferences or events, I just remember it just brought back my memories. So stuff in that building. So I just wanted to share that perspective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Melissa. I think that I know from the in-person workshops, a few folks I talked to, you know, they saw it as sort of iconic for Shaker. I think they were thinking of it from the exterior, you know, facade of it. And Chris, I know that you've talked about there's ways to sort of keep the historic elements and do some clever things or creative things to get the space on the inside, you know, more up to date. But I feel like the folks that I sort of interacted with and some of the comments I read, they felt that it was, you know, from an exterior facade standpoint, an iconic building for the city.
Yeah, there are definitely ways we can renovate the existing, use the exterior facades as part of the building. We've also had conversations, at least with the high school, of retaining the original construction, the historic core, and the sort of bell tower. So there are a lot of ways we can look at that, you know, keeping those key elements and then building new sort of behind. So that's definitely something. So it could be a hybrid. And as we develop these scenarios, that'll be something that we can test with the public on, you know, they want a full renovation, sort of a hybrid where portions are renovated and then portions are built new. That's something we can look at as we move forward.
Any other comments on station 3? Okay. And then we also asked about, you know, alternative uses. And so Chris, if you want to run through a few of the comments here.
Yeah, so neighborhood recreation and social facilities. I think we've heard some of those and some of the other comments. Again, comments about green space, public park with lots of trees and recreational space. Could be repurposed and used as a center for senior citizens and social services and recreational classes for older people. So those were just some ideas that we heard. And we're actually going to touch on this a little bit more tonight on some alternative uses for facilities if they weren't used in their current capacity. So we'd like to hear, you know, now we can obviously get some feedback from you here, but we have an opportunity later tonight to go into a little bit more depth of this as well.
Yeah. So this station had 2 parts. You know, the big first question was like, if it's going to remain, like if the Shaker High School remains a high school, you know, would you like to see it renovated or build new? And then we also asked if it's not in the future, if these facilities are not, you know, staying as school buildings or current facility uses, what would you like to see? And that's what led to these comments. So we kind of try to have people look at it from 2 different perspectives.
Sarah, can maybe Brian read some of the comments in the chat? I'm not sure if everybody's seeing those, but I think it's good just to get them on the table.
Oh yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, where to start, Joyce?
Oh, don't start too far back, just on this one.
There are a couple of comments about Fernway and how that is an example of an existing facility being renovated and how, you know, that might be a use. There were some other comments and questions from Danielle and others about that renovation doesn't necessarily equate to 21st century learning, and what are the real values of Shaker? Is it that we have a unique historic architecture, or that we are supportive of our students and the 21st century learning that has been discussed so far? That's a very brief rundown.
Great.
That's a great comment.
Yep. Thanks, Brian, for those comments. Station 4 was about how the facilities can be more equitable and inclusive. And the first question asked about inequalities that people saw in the current locations of Shaker facilities, looking broadly across schools, library, and city. And Chris, if you want to hit these comments.
Yeah, so there were a number of comments about the poorest part of the community is furthest away from the elementary school. So proximity of the schools to the communities that they serve. And I think this goes back to the earlier comment about some of the comments we heard and some of the direct response or people that responded to the survey. There's a lack of free transportation to the high school. We know that there isn't any bus transportation to the high school, so it's either walk or alternate means to get to the high school. Ability to walk to the school is not equal, especially south of Chagrin and Van Aken. So again, access, transportation access to the different schools, and then distance from school locations for students of color. So you can see these are all sort of somewhat related. But these were some of the key comments that we pulled out to highlight this evening. So love to hear any additional comments you have on this station.
Yeah, I would comment right away on trying to get the ability to walk to school is not equal. I mentioned earlier in transportation, trying to get across Chagrin or Van Aken or Lee Road or Warrensville is practically impossible for a family with some young children, particularly pushing a stroller and 2 school-age children in tow is very dangerous. So commuting needs to be taken very seriously, and it seems to have been an aside issue.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you.
I think I saw another hand up. Kevin, maybe?
Yeah, Kevin.
Yeah, just wanted, I guess, to add to the thought. I think the theme of the comments on this slide is a very important point, but I also think there's a relationship between where the facilities are located and what happens to property values and income levels in those neighborhoods. I don't know if there's ever been a study of what happened when Moreland and Ludlow and Sussex were closed, but wondering if perhaps the disparities were a little bit less when those neighborhoods had facilities that made those residential areas more valuable.
And Kevin,
it's effect and cause, I guess, is maybe the
right.
The issue. As we're thinking about where new facilities go, I think it's important to think of how we can reverse some of those inequities with the decision about what we're doing in facilities.
Yeah.
totally agree, Kevin. Oh, sorry, Nicole.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to go ahead, Vicki. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to agree with Kevin. It also puts those communities at a disadvantage in attracting young families. The most attractive communities for young families are closer to the elementary schools.
This was a huge point, and there was a meeting in a box with the SAMS group, Shaker African American Mom Support, and the neighborhood schools was a huge point. They're mostly from Moreland, Ludlow, some from Lomond, the edge of Lomond. Obviously don't like being bused all the way across town to Mercer. The feeling was they wanted their kids, especially at the elementary age, they want their kids close to them. Nothing against the integration, but they don't like having to go across town and worry about their kids across town. So yeah, this was a huge point. Also, when we showed the pictures of the modern classrooms, one of the biggest reactions was, well, that's nice, but we need A, schools on this side of town, and B, just somewhere for our kids to go after school. So, the idea of having, being able to use new school buildings after hours was, resonated with them, but that was more important to have somewhere for the kids after school than to renovate the schools. So,
Gotcha.
Thanks, Nicole.
Thank you.
Okay, if you've got other comments, feel free to use the chat. I am going to try to move us along because I do want to make sure we have time for our discussion. We have a couple more stations to get through. These were some other ideas about, first was identifying the inequities, and then how can our community facilities be more equitable? So Chris, if you want to hit these quickly.
Yep. So each elementary school should have the same spaces and opportunities in each building. After school programs are often only offered in one elementary and not the other. So again, equity of sort of facilities throughout all of the elementary schools. Better transportation and more centralized locations. After hours opportunities for all students. So again, I think that goes back to Nicole's comment about recreation opportunities after school hours. Making sure that all facilities are of similar quality, and making sure that all members of the community have easy access to common facilities. So you can see there's some reoccurring themes with some of those comments about how the facilities can be more equitable and inclusive in the district.
Any other comments or ideas
There's no surprises.
Yeah. Thanks,
Yeah.
Vicky. Okay, continue to put comments into the chat. If something comes to you, you want to share it. This Station 5 was about 21st century learning. And we used the visual preference survey kind of approach here. We had images of different types of spaces, configured in different ways. And you can see here, like 60% of folks really gravitated towards this photo, 55% towards this sort of more lab-like. And this one here where it had, sort of different ways the students are, engaging with the space. And then, going down here, these are existing photos of more traditional classroom, traditional hallways. This was, there was some setup here that I didn't include in this PowerPoint that showed about, the traditional hallway with classrooms on either side versus a more collaborative approach. Chris, maybe you can explain, but, having more hub with collaborative space with classrooms around it. And so, can tell people that, we're gravitating to sort of more of these collaborative spaces. You can see that kind of here versus sort of the more traditional approaches. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything else to add, flavor to add to this, but.
Yeah, it was just sort of a comment about what the current sort of mode of transportation, or I'm sorry, of education is with the classrooms, double loaded corridors, single corridor, like you see with example 7, and the classroom for example 8, versus the more 21st century where you have sort of these learning pods or learning neighborhoods, and it's more of a collaborative feel. As an example, the image number 2 there, that, the sort of gathering stair that allows for classroom instruction, for impromptu interaction with the students, a break time to be able to have a different alternative to sitting at tables. So just the different concept between where we've come and where we're currently at with the state of education in Shaker relative to our facilities and where we can go. So, seeing that we've got higher percentages for a lot of these elements versus what we currently have isn't surprising, but it does help us understand what spaces people are gravitating to and then what they want to see as part of the master plan.
Can I make a
Not sure. Yep.
comment? So I just noticed how that it's not really based on grade level. So when you look at those spaces, I think the experts know pretty much well, like the new 21st century learning spaces and how different grade levels can handle certain spaces better than others. So I think all of them, like all of the open area ones, are going to be higher, and then you see the glass one with the higher aged ones, like the second one right there, the 55%.
55.
You can see that's more of like a high school kind of class. The one on the left is more like a middle school or lower level kind of area. So I'm not sure, looking at our buildings and our structures the way they are right now, and how the high school, the majority of people want to see that renovated with the high school, there's certain things that can happen in those spaces to be renovated, but then the lower levels to get something like that to where it's at 60% is pretty impossible based on the current structure of the building. That's how I just think of it. So I'm not sure if that's a good relevant thing or like a good question kind of thing. It's like more like guided questions or formative to kind of like convince the community like, hey, this is better than looking at something that's older. That's how I think of it when I look at it.
Okay. Well, I will say that, the existing buildings can have some limitations in adding 21st century facilities, but they can also have some really success stories. So one example, and the client group and leadership group are going to be looking at this in the future, is Cleveland Heights, University Heights, and the high school, where they were able to take some of the older additions to that building, take it back to its historic core, and then actually do some additions that lend itself to this. So it's a little bit of a hybrid of both. But they were able to sort of do that single loaded corridor with classrooms on either side, rework that for some more collaboration spaces in addition to labs and classrooms. So I understand what you're saying. We're showing these sort of shiny new pictures with what we, the old, what we have, and we're saying, what do you like better? I understand that, but it is also very intentional that, maker spaces are 45 versus sort of a little bit more of a standard classroom with flexible furniture and more sort of a classroom setting. So we take all this with the relative percentages and sort of weigh that in how we sort of set up the master plan and what we think the options are for, new construction versus renovation. That's helpful, Nevin. I see a couple more hands raised, Sarah.
Yep, go ahead.
Frank, do you have your hand raised? And then John, I believe.
Yeah, I put a comment in the chat. I went to a high school with a 3-floor rotunda in the middle of the high school. It was impossible to teach in the classrooms anywhere near the rotunda during the course of the day. So although like example 2 looks very attractive, just my experience is going to be that's going to be a challenge to try to teach with that much noise. Thank you.
And we have heard a number of comments to the public engagement sessions in person about the situation in the 70s where they took down all the walls and had large open floor plans. There are a lot of things we can do today that weren't implemented back then on acoustics and ways to sort of isolate spaces so that you don't have all that noise. White noise systems. There's different systems to absorb and reflect light, or sound in appropriate levels. So a lot more has been done and is being done in these settings to make sure that it's a good learning environment for everyone that's in the space. But those are very good comments. We don't want to repeat, things that happened in the past that just didn't work. John, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the challenge of slides like this and survey questions like this, and I agree with Nevin too, right? The bright and shiny versus, what education is one of those experiences for most of us that is, universal in the public sphere. And so much of our answers are due to our own personal experience. In other words, I learned this way. This was my, for example, the familiarity of the high school, right? That's appealing, that's iconic, that clicks into all those memories, all those positive memories. But those memories are in amber, right? They are not in sync with 21st century learning, right? There are no walls of power jacks for our Chromebooks, for example, at the high school, right? In other words, I feel like in another iteration, if this goes back to the community, whether it's 30-second clips, whether it's an article, whether it's some kind of further articulation of what people are actually seeing in these bright and shiny visuals and what they offer the community, I think that's really important. I think part of our job here too, it's that dual nature. We're here to get feedback, but also to educate the community on what they're actually seeing as opposed to the static, colorful visual.
Yep, that's a good comment. Thank you very much for that. Thank you.
Okay. So there's a couple comments, and I know maybe Chris, you hit on some of these already when you were explaining the photos, but if you want to share these.
Yeah, so these are some really good comments. So in 21st century learning, flexibility is key. So keeping the infrastructure flexible, that is a key component to the 21st century learning, and setting up facilities to support that. Collaborative spaces that are important for a variety of settings, classrooms with various spaces, a flexible space for different kinds of learners, teachers, individuals, and groups, varied options for learning. Not everyone learns the same way, so making sure that we have a lot of different spaces for everyone to take advantage of, and then multiple learning areas within one large space. So a lot of similar things here, but a lot of things that obviously support 21st century learning and the direction that Shaker's looking to go in the future.
Thanks, Chris.
I know we're trying to
I'm going to move
move
ahead
forward,
here.
Sarah, on this to get to some of the breakout sessions.
Yeah, I want to move ahead so we have time for our small group discussions. And then we had an open-ended question as well at the station about how do you envision our schools in the future? And I think these were a couple maybe reinforcing what we've already heard. But Chris, if you want to.
Yeah, the best practices, we've heard a lot of comments about working for all students. So again, the facilities that meet all the students' needs, warm, inviting, fostering collaboration among the students, teachers, and community members, and then opportunities to explore different types of technology and arts. So having that integrated into all the schools was another common theme that we heard.
Great. And then finally, we asked about how the schools are organized, and we shared the current organization level, and we had 2 different example options for how the grades could be banded together in one facility or in buildings. And so this was the one that got the most sort of votes, some interest. It had a standalone sort of pre-K and then a K-5 buildings, 6-8 and 9-12 as grouped together. So Chris, if you want to share some of these common themes.
Yeah, and the initial information that we shared was from the educational visioning that said there's a benefit to having at least 3 years in each building for a host of different items. We did hear a lot of comments, sort of jumping down to the bottom one, about experts should determine based on the facts and research. So some people said that they weren't sure if one was better than the other. They didn't have a personal opinion, but were sort of wanting to lean on the facts and research to drive that decision. I think that's probably the last one is the most prominent comment we heard overall. But then developmental stages should be considered, and then feeling the opportunity for collaboration, mentoring, and family-centered programming is optimized when the K-5 or even grade 6, like it used to be, are all together. So just some of the common ideas. But again, I think a lot of people wanted us to or rely on the facts and the research to sort of drive the decision on this.
Yep.
And I guess we will add, we did hear a minimum of 3, but we've also heard comments about maybe a 4th grade band in a building is a good idea as well to further limit the number of transitions for the students.
Yep. Okay. Any comments or reactions to the organization feedback here?
I just want to throw out something. I know that there's a lot of communities doing 6 to 8 buildings, and I'm curious about that because I teach in Warrensville. I teach a STEM class, so I teach electives, and I have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. But the maturity level of 6th graders compared to 7th and 8th is like so far different. Like something, I'm not sure if it's the age level. This is my first time doing middle school for the past couple of years. And I'm just curious as to whether, like, developmentally, based on how the teachers treat 6th graders, like how, and maybe someone can just stick with me after this is over or something, but maybe there's a way in which we're supposed to be approaching, if it's 6th grade up there, of getting them to be more mature, to be ready for 7th and 8th grade or something. It's really weird how like they're totally divided. Like 6th graders don't know 7th and 8th graders. They're totally taught separately. Why are they in the same building if that's the case? You know, it's kind of odd.
That would, I'd echo that, Nevin. And I'm one of those products where my elementary school was kindergarten through 6th grade. And, you know, when I think about how the continuity I had in that growth range from kindergarten to a 6th grader, I think we came out ready for 7th grade. We had relationships with teachers all of those years who watched us grow and mentored us, you know, through those developmental stages, especially that 5th, 6th, where we see so much drama now, right? I think it was because of that continuity of relationships within that building that we did not have that same dramatic change in personality and behavior through the 5th and 6th. It was a very different time, and we also did not go to the high school until 10th grade. So our middle years were 7th, 8th, and 9th. There was it just seemed to be a better correlation there. and you felt much more mature and ready to go to high school. But Chris, my question too, given that request to talk to the experts, do you plan to bring us some info on what the experts are saying today about what the beneficial grade bands look like?
Yeah, we can, and some of this came out of the educational visioning, which I understand. You know, we did have a sort of little report out on that, but we can, yeah, as a follow-up and an advisory committee meeting, have some more conversation about this. Absolutely. Yep. And then, like I said, I just mentioned about possible 4 grades per building. So, you know, that could be the 5 through 8. I know, Nevin, that doesn't really address your specific point, given the 5th and 6th grade, but you know, these are all things that we should consider. And I just saw some other comments pop up about some other great opportunities. I think it was 9, 11, 12 with a sort of, you know, 3 grades below that being grouped together. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of groupings we can look at, and we can report back maybe as part of the next AC meeting on some more of that.
Okay, so quickly, Chris, so we can get into our small groups.
Yep.
Chris is going to share a little bit about, you know, taking all this input and the other work that he's doing, and what's next for the process.
Yeah, so we just wanted to let you know what we're working on behind the scenes. So we are reviewing and documenting the most prevalent concepts and themes from the client group, which you know is you know, part of the city, the schools, and the library. And then also the public engagement, these over 700 comments that we got. So that's sort of the basis of where we're starting. We are creating a series of options that correspond to those public comments and provide unique ideas and different scenarios for discussion. So for instance, if, you know, we might throw out in one of those scenarios, let's just say there's 3 scenarios for argument's sake, some different concepts in one versus the second versus the third for a public comment. But again, going back to the core concepts, the guiding principles, and the comments and the feedback we heard as part of the round 1 engagement. Those options are being evaluated against those guiding principles, as I mentioned, and how successful they are in addressing the educational and civic goals. And of course, this is the consultant team's opinion. This will all go before the advisory committee and also to the public for their comments. So it's just not us in sort of a vacuum, but we have to start the process. So we're taking that initiative and starting that process. The confirmed options from the client and leadership group are then presented for future public comment. That will be the round 2 engagement, which we'll touch on that briefly at the end of this presentation today on the time frame for that. And then there's going to be further refinement and development of the scenarios based on the round 2 engagement. This is an iterative process. So we will provide options. Those options will be commented on. We will continue to refine them, improve on them, until we feel as the advisory committee, the client group, and the leadership group that there are valuable and worth sharing for the final master plan for the district. So that's very quickly sort of what we're doing behind the scenes, some of the next steps we're going to be taking, and ultimately how we get to a final master plan recommendation as a community.
Yep. Thanks, Chris. And, you know, as Chris mentioned, like it's really important that you all have, you know, been a part of this engagement. You've heard these results. We're going to provide you this, you know, fuller report. But, you know, you will get to see these options, these scenarios before we go out to the public, and we'll get your input and be able to, you know, tweak them and stuff as well. So know that is coming. And Chris and his team are working hard on that. So I want to get into some small group discussion. We have a couple setup slides that Chris is going to go through. We felt like as we were preparing for this meeting that, you know, through the public engagement and the educational visioning, that we heard a lot about, you know, the schools. And I think there's some, you know, good ideas out there about schools. So we like to focus the discussion today about the more city community recreation and facilities. So we've got a few questions here that kind of focus us more on that tonight. So I'm going to let Chris set up a couple of slides before we go into our breakouts.
Yeah, so we wanted to look at some of the community facilities and recreation. So we put this plan together just to give everybody an understanding of where the majority of these locations are within the city. and what happens at each one of the sites. So this will be available during the breakout sessions, so you can refer back to it. So you don't have to know all this by heart to go to the breakout sessions. But we just wanted to make sure that people understood, if you're not totally familiar. Of course, there's city facilities, there's school facilities. Each site has a little bit different offering. But just going through, I'm just going to touch on some of these high levels. So Onaway Elementary, Woodbury Elementary, there's soccer and track fields there. There's 9 tennis courts. There's a field hockey, and then a pool, of course, that's associated. That's at Woodbury Elementary. Boulevard Elementary, we have softball, youth baseball, and a soccer field. The high school, there's a varsity baseball, auxiliary baseball, multi-use soccer, and then there's a stadium and track, of course, for football. And there's the Chesterton Athletic Fields, which is number 4. It has a soccer field. There are some facilities around the city that we're calling multi-use, that have different, they could be used as baseball, softball, but there are also different fields that could sort of be, you can overlay a soccer field on top of, sort of 2 outfields of a baseball or softball, so that they can be used in a little different fashion that happens occasionally at some of these sites. Sarah, I guess in interest of time, I don't know if I need to go through all of these.
No, I
in detail.
wouldn't. Yeah, each facilitator has this PowerPoint. So as we get into the breakouts, if you want to pull this up, if people have questions, I think, we can send this PowerPoint out and you can take a closer look at it. But I think just wanting to sort of focus on some of the community level facilities across the community is important. And then here's a little summary slide too.
Right. So for the purposes of the master plan, it'd be great to know about whether you think the locations are appropriate, if there should be additional locations, and also if there should be additional types of fields, and the type or additional quantity of fields or the types of fields. So this is a summary of this overall city. We have 10 soccer fields, 17 tennis courts, 3 tracks. There's 1 skate park at Thornton, 1 ice rink. There's 16 baseball, softball diamonds, 4 pickleball courts, 3 pools, 2 through the schools, 1 through the city, 1 volleyball court, 2 basketball courts, and then we have what we're calling 9 sort of multi-purpose fields or multi-use fields. So again, locations in the city, type and quantity would be great to hear from you.
Okay, so we got 3 questions, and Brian's going to copy these into the chat. So when we go into our breakout, we can reference them. But we really want to know what's your vision for community facilities when you think about parks and recreation, types, quantities, location needs, just as what Chris said with fields and things like that. So what do you when you envision for the future, what you'd like to see in the community, what we want to hear about that. And then the same questions about ideas for joint facility programming opportunities. So we mentioned that earlier. I know that maybe you're not aware, but the main library, as part of their renovation, has a registration space for the schools in there. So that's a great school library programming opportunity or collaboration that's happening there. But there are other opportunities and there's other things going on. The Innovation Center at the Stephanie Tun Jones Community Building is another example of a school function within a city facility. So thinking along the lines of, sharing of admin or other kind of program opportunities, any ideas you have for that, we'd love to hear those as well. And then just general ideas for adaptive reuse of facilities, thinking generally about, if you have a specific idea about one school, but we're thinking generally about elementary schools, middle, high school, community building, Thornton Park in general, we'd love to hear that as well from you all tonight. So I'm going to stop sharing here. And I am going to ask Brian to quickly put us into our breakouts. And before he does that, though, when you get in there, you will have a facilitator who will say hi to you and introduce themselves. And then we'll just jump right in hearing from you all around these 3 questions. We're going to be taking notes as a facilitator. And then Brian's going to bring us back together since we are a little, I want to make sure we have enough time. So he's going to bring us back together like at 8:55. We just have a couple wrap up next steps just to share at the end of the meeting. So we want to maximize our time to have together. So go ahead, Brian, just hang tight. If you're not familiar with the breakouts, you'll be automatically placed into your breakout session here momentarily.